Masile,
Brother, how are you, Darren?
all right. How are you?
I'm good, brother, man. Yeah, I'm happy. The sound is fine. I did this with Funeka earlier, ne?
Okay,
Sure, my brother.
sure.
Sure, Darren.
Mashile.
Hi, Chair. How are you?
Good, how's it?
Good, man.
Okay.
Can't complain.
Aningiphendulanga nginibhalele ilokhuzana nangangiphendula.
Email?
WhatsApp kwilokhuzana.
No, I haven't.
Kwimenco.
Kumengo?
Yeah, kwimenco group.
Okay, but ayifikanga kum.
Hayi.
Are you sure you sent it?
Maybe
I don't see it here. I'm not sure if the colleagues have received it.
boba buzo ngoba nje angiphendule
Yes.
umuntu ngithetha ngedwa.
Okay, let me check.
Yeah, check. Ngizoyi-check.
Okay, Chair.
Sharp.
Yeah, i-picture i-right yakho, ne?
Right, ne?
Yes,
Okay.
kakhulu. Sure.
Thank you.
Right.
Morning, Darren. I'm trying to check my video here. Ish. Doesn't look good.
Good morning, everybody on the platform, honorable members. I get messages here. I get messages here. Honorable members are trying to join. I don't know whether the storm yesterday is having an impact on that. Can you just give them a few minutes and we'll then start the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Chair.
Yeah. Good morning, honorable members, support staff, members of the media, members of the public who are on the platform. Let me take this opportunity to welcome Parliamentary Budget Office led by Dr. Chanchis. Dr. Chanchis and your team, you are most welcome. Thank you for coming. As I said at the beginning, there's definitely a problem with network. I don't know if it has something to do with the storms.
Recording in progress.
That we experienced yesterday, but that as it may, I think we need to start. Mashile, any apologies?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. No, we don't have any apologies at the moment.
Thank you. Let's note there's an apology by Honorable Kwankwa. He's not feeling well. Wish him a speedy recovery. Okay, thank you. Dr. Chanchis, we are all yours. It's just a second. You will be addressing us. Remember that on three bills. Yeah, on the three bills. These were the bills that were tabled by the Minister of Finance when he delivered the midterm budget policy statement. So there are bills which were tabled there, and those bills are the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, the Adjustment Appropriation Bill, and the Eskom Debt Relief Amendment Bill. Those are the bills that we're dealing with, and PPO is going to be addressing us on those three bills. Dr. Chanchis and your team, please take us through your presentation. Be economic with time, but again, don't rob us of information. So you need to get try to get to some optimal point of some sort where we're able to achieve both. But thank you very much. You are welcome. You can start with your presentation.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honourable members. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me. Yes, I think you can hear me. I'm simply having a device problem as well this morning. We really thank for the opportunity, again, for sharing our analysis with this important committee. The team is here also, will take us through the presentation. I'll just do the quick introduction remarks, and then I'll give to Dr. Nal to take us through. There's our outline of the presentation. We definitely focus on those three bills, Chairperson, and also better focus also on the state-owned entities thereof. Next slide. So I think the intention is to examine the changes that are made in the bill, divisional revenue, and shows that the allocations to national and local government does decrease, while the provinces' equitable shares has increased to fund, in particular, the wage agreement in the health and education sector. The government states that the reduction in the conditional grants are based on underspending, as this at the context of government admitting that spending cuts has implications for the programs, particularly it makes them less effective over time. But also we did some work on underspending, which they highlight some of the key root causes. And I think our view is that those matters have to be addressed more broadly rather than just using the budget cuts as a way of, because it doesn't mean when you cut the budgets, the program, the needs for the services also get sacrificed in this regard. The increase in provincial equitable share and members might not be sufficient to cover some of the agreements matters. We anticipate that province might be forced to actually prioritize some of the services expenditure to address such outcomes of the agreement. The province and municipalities are responsible for providing basic services, particularly that's related to households, more pronounced. So our concern really broadly is around the implications of the fiscal consolidation in the provinces and municipalities to be able to deliver these basic services. What does a fiscal consolidation It's meant that reduction in real per capita expenditure on key social wage expenditure, and also this is very important to take into account the need for these services for survival of many of the households in particular. Public service play a critical role in households' social protection and in building resilience to disasters like COVID-19 natural disaster. Spoke about the natural disaster that took place last night, Chair. And really, public service plays a very important role in supporting households such. And that has been taken into account, particularly when we think about cutting the cost, or the implication of this cutting of the costs, cutting expenditure in these dynamics that we're living in. And lastly, Chair, we emphasize that emphasize that the social wage, as proposed in the MTPS, does not really protect it. It's not protected from the inflationary issues, and also in terms of the population growth. So in a way, it is a decline over a long term as opposed to the increase. Chair, I just want to leave it there and give Dr. Orlando to take us through to the loss of representation team as well. Thanks so much, Nelia, and Kamin.
Thank you, Dumisani, and good morning, honourable members and guests. Next slide, please. So members, this table shows the amendments to the Division of Revenue framework. The total framework increases by 13.6 billion in 2023-24, of which the provincial sphere of government receives 17.6 billion. Members, the Treasury also indicated that transfers to provinces and municipalities will change significantly over the 2024 medium-term expenditure framework relative to the previous budget. Reductions are focused on grants and programs where there has been underspending in recent years, and provinces and municipalities will be forced to reprioritize resources to avoid negative effects on critical services. Next slide. More detail on the amendments to the Division of Revenue framework. The average annual growth over the 2024 MTEF in the national, provincial and local government spheres are 2.3% for national, 3.6% provincial and 4.4% for local. Growth from this year to next year is, however, only 1.8% on a national level, 2% on a provincial level and 5.3% on a local government level. The increase in provincial equitable share might not be sufficient to cover the implementation of the public service wage agreements. Next slide. Amendments to the 2023 provincial equitable share. The total of 17.6 billion added to the provincial equitable share is to cover the personnel cost increases in health and education only, and the average annual growth of over the 2024 MTEF is 3.3% versus a 2.5% in budget 2023. So the increase on provincial equitable shares are slightly higher over the 2024 medium-term expenditure framework. Next slide. Members, just to remind you that the reduction are focused on grants and programs where there has been underspending in recent years. The table shows the current spending on conditional grants as at 30 September 2023. The slowest spending is on agriculture, land reform and rural development, and they've only spent 31.6% in the first 6 months of the financial year. Human settlements has only spent 38% of the grants in the first 6 months of the financial year, of which informal settlements upgrading partnership grant to provinces have only spent 22.3%. Next slide. Members, basically all the provincial grants have been reduced despite spending trends of 50% or more. To note is the reduction in education infrastructure of minus 1.6 billion. Human settlements, you can understand the decrease in human settlements because of the slow spending. And then they've also decreased the EPWP grants, both of those grants. The other reduction that you need to note is on the school infrastructure backlog grant of 260 million, but at least they had a rollover of 137 from the previous financial year. Next slide. More detail on the amendments to the school infrastructure backlog grant is that of the 260 million, 175 million forms part of the budget consolidation. 85 million is a reduction to the ECD grant. 57 million is reprioritized from the school infrastructure backlog grant to the Department of Basic Education to cover the cost for compensation of employees. And the 137 million rollover is mainly to complete sanitation projects, and 18.5 million of the rollover is to cover cost associated with cost to the implementation agent. Next slide. Amendments to the 2023 municipal conditional grants. To note is the municipal disaster recovery grant received 1.5 billion. Informal settlements upgrading and the urban settlement development grants also were reduced. And then again, members, the EPWP has also been reduced. Something to note.
Honorable members, please mute. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Oneni.
Something to note again is the public transport network grant that has also been reduced by 600 million. Next slide. Of the 180 million reduction in the integrated national electrification grant, 53 million is reprioritized to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy to fund the rehabilitation of derelict and ownership of mines. I'll also say something about that later on. And then the 303 million has been shifted from the indirect component of the regional bulk infrastructure grant to the indirect component of the water services infrastructure grant. This is to enable the Department of Water and Sanitation to manage contractual obligations, budget pressures, accruals, and payables for projects in several municipalities. Next slide. I'll just hand over to my next colleague. Thank you.
Good morning, honorable members. I'll be taking us through the situational analysis. Here, as the PBO has previously highlighted, there is deep income inequality and wealth inequality in South Africa. South Africans have been experiencing a protracted cost of living crisis since even before 1994. And in the NDP, the goal was to eliminate poverty and to raise the share of national income of the bottom 40% from 6 to 10%. As you can see on the graph on the right, that the bottom 50% actually only have 5.3% of the income. And the top 10% have 66.5%. So we are far from even reaching the NDP goal itself, even though we can admit that even if we reach this goal of 10%, there'd still be deep income inequality in our country. In addition to that, as you can see in terms of wealth, the bottom 50% actually have negative wealth, which means that after they've taken care of all their expenses, their debt, and so forth, they actually have negative wealth. So this is significant in the context of South Africa, where the top 10% has 85.7% of the wealth. So income and wealth inequality remains high. And in terms of the distribution of income in households, it's important to note that for most households, income, 51% of households get it from salaries, and that grants remain an important share of incomes that households have. So large populations or proportions of the population are subject to debilitating poverty and unemployment, and institutional support is inadequate. And so we really need to take income and wealth inequality seriously as we go forward, as more and more disasters and polycrisis impact households. Next slide, please. I'm not sure if it's moving. Can I please have the next slide?
Next slide, please. Who's helping us with the slides?
Siraj?
I think Mapula's sharing the slides. Maybe she might be having a technical issue.
It's me. It seems frozen. I'm trying to
Reboot.
But while Mafula tries to change the slide, I think it's really here to point to the fact that we really need to work on building household resilience, and households cannot be resilient if they do not have adequate resources to be able to, live through the crisis that they're experiencing over and over again. And these are becoming more intense and more frequent, as our director has already noted with yesterday's disaster. And so continuing on the cost of living crisis, in this graph here on the right, we show what the average food basket against the national minimum wage and grants is. So as you can see there on the left, that is what the national minimum wage, or rather the national minimum wage is there. But to say that the average cost of a household food basket is 5,155.77 a month, which is lower than the average minimum wage. And why do we compare these things? It's basically to say that if there's one waged worker per household, and there's 4 people in a household, then all those people would fall below the upper bound poverty line. Right. So as we know, in South Africa, unemployment is quite high. So on average, you could find that there's very few people per household working. And so majority of those people, if they only relied on that minimum wage, they would all fall below the upper bound poverty line. And so here's to highlight that additional sources of income, such as social grants, are vital in really helping households secure their basic needs. In fact, grants are critical in diversifying the sources of income to households so that they are able to take care of themselves and their basic needs. Next slide, please. In this slide, we're showing that public healthcare remains critical, of course, and as we know, that it remains underfunded and overstretched. Just as a comparison, members should know that we spend the same for 84% of the population as the private sector does for 16% of the population on healthcare. So when you look at the GDP number in expenditure, it's about 4%. So you can only imagine the resources that are being split across so many people in the country as compared to the few. So private healthcare access is also disproportionately enjoyed by white South Africans. Of course, healthcare should be considered within a lens of race, gender, geography, amongst other intersecting identities. And so it's important that we highlight which groups of people might be disproportionately benefiting from it. But we also know that South Africans still use the public healthcare system significantly. Most households, 71.9%, visit a public healthcare facility first when they fall ill or have an accident. And so it is important that we provide the adequate resources for those people to be taken care of well. In additional slides, we show the real per capita expenditure on health, and we can see that it is declining in the medium term, and actually has not been growing significantly, even though we've just gone through COVID-19 pandemic, which should have shown us that investments in healthcare are very important. Another important consideration is the geographic distribution of healthcare facilities. Relatively wealthy households are more likely to be located within a 10-kilometer radius to a healthcare facility as opposed to poorer households. So socioeconomically disadvantaged people are more likely to postpone healthcare due to the high costs of accessing it. Next slide, please. Here we show again the education sector, which we've highlighted continuously, that even though large gains have been made to access to education, we know that there's been a significant increase of numbers of students going to no fee paying schools. But at the same time, we do know that in South Africa, that socioeconomic status is still a determinant of access to education. And here we particularly highlights childcare arrangements for children aged 0 to 4 by income quintile. And that basically shows that children who are obviously poorer are more likely to stay at home with a parent or guardian, whereas other children or wealthier children are more likely to be in an institution of learning. And of course, we know that early childhood development is critical for the long-term returns in education generally and people's lives. And so it's important that there's more resources allocated to ECD, as we know that there's also not inadequate distribution throughout the country in terms of ECD facilities themselves. And the percentage of individuals aged 18 to 24, so moving away from the children who are still attending secondary school, was higher for households in poorer income groups than in households in higher income groups. And in previous slides, the PBO has highlighted that some of the reasons that people were dropping out were the costs. So as much as children might be going to no fee paying schools, we have to remember that there are other costs that are associated with accessing education beyond school fees alone. Next slide, please. In terms of learning outcomes, what we see is that many children are unable to read for meaning. The Oxford University Press reports on early grade reading indicate that fewer than 50% of grade 1 children learn the letters of the alphabet by the end of grade 1, which also links to the previous point about ECD. So if there isn't adequate resourcing in ECD, then we also see these lags later on. But also, not just that, the Pearl study, the International Reading Literacy Study, states that 81% of grade 4 learners are unable to read for meaning in any language. So our learning outcomes are not where they should be. Previously, the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights had noted, and I'm not going to read the whole quote, but had noted that significant budget cuts in health and education and other sectors were worsening inequalities. In the recent MTBPS, National Treasury also acknowledges that the cuts to the education budget might lead to lesser performance outcomes. And so it is important that we pay attention to this, where there's admittance that there will be worse learning outcomes. And this is not the first time the National Treasury has noted this in the MTBPS. In fact, in the 2021 budget as well, it was noted that the reductions in the compensation of employees would lead to more teachers leaving, and that children in no fee paying schools would be disproportionately impacted. Next slide, please. In terms of the provisioning of basic public services, you see here that there's been an increase in some areas in the number of households with access to basic services. We see there's been an increase in water, in electricity, sewage and sanitation. However, noting that there's been a decline in the number of people who have solid waste management or access to solid waste management. It has declined from 2002 to 2022 from 66% to 63%. Also noting here in this graph that the increases, for example, in water, in that 20-year period, the increase has only been about 5%. So we're not making adequate or fast enough changes over a long period of time. And basic public services are critical in building household resilience and where social reproduction takes place, where people are able to take care of themselves and undertake the life-giving activities that they need to survive. So basic services continue to be very important. However, sometimes when people do have access, it does not mean that they can afford it. So rates and taxes have increased by 118% over the last 10 years. Electricity tariffs have increased by 177%. Water tariffs have increased by 213%. And so households, as you can imagine, are having to choose between paying for basic public services and food. And particularly in a context of stagnant wage growth, you can imagine that as incomes aren't growing, it means that the room within household budgets to really allocate resources to basic public services versus food versus transport and other goods are all competing on their own household balance sheets, so to speak. Next slide, please. And here, in terms of the percentage of households that have access to free basic services, we have seen a decline between 2019 and 2021, which is concerning, as you can imagine, that inequalities are increasing. Households have been faced with COVID-19 and so forth. So we'd imagine that this number should actually be increasing. And also, National Treasury actually allocates more, or rather accounts for more indigent households than what municipalities actually provision for. So this continues to be a concern, that even though many households, millions of households, 10 million households are actually budgeted for, it's actually about 3 million or less that actually receive the basic services, free basic services. So this will continue to be a concern. But this is part of a larger problem, which is around the funding model assumption of the white paper on local government, right? So municipalities are unable to fulfill the conflicting objectives placed on them of achieving financial viability through self-financing and to improve service delivery. So in this case, what happens is that, of course, municipalities allocate some of this money to other expenditure and make it very difficult for people to be able to qualify as indigent. And therefore, many low-income households that should be benefiting from this are not receiving the basic free services that they should be receiving. Next slide, please. In terms of the social relief of distress grant, we've shown in the past that actually, the fact that it has not been adjusted for inflation means that it has been eroded. What people could buy in 2020 when it was introduced versus what they can buy now is less. It is actually worth 228 Rand today, if you compare it to 2020. So this, I mean, to 2020. So it's important that this grant, even though we already acknowledge that it is not adequate, that it is at least inflation adjusted to take into account, the changes in the economy and so forth. But not only that, we note here in the MTBPS that the allocations continue to go downwards. We've highlighted in the past that, initially, the DSD had said 10.9 million people needed it, but that National Treasury only allocated enough money for 10.5 million people, which led to the criteria changing, which ultimately led to even less people getting it. The budget 2023 estimated the number of beneficiaries would be about 8.5 million, which again is different from the 10.9 million people that DSD had identified as needing it. So about 3.1 to 5.9 million people of the target group are still not receiving this grant because of the stringent rules. And we also note here that only 33.6 billion has been allocated for the SRD in 2024-25, which is less than the previous allocations. So you can only imagine that the changes in allocations mean even less people are going to be receiving it. Next slide, please. In terms of social reproduction, which I've already mentioned, which includes, the unpaid care work that women undertake in households, we continuously note that fiscal consolidation worsens the socioeconomic conditions of households over time. This is something that has to be taken into account. The budget can be considered balanced. However, there are long-term implications for what happens when there's continuous fiscal consolidation and inadequate expenditure, particularly for public basic services. It is because expenditure on social grants, basic services, and community and social expenditure, they're considered as consumption. And this is problematic framing of this. It does not take into account that there's other work that is not counted in GDP that households do to support the economy. So household work is important for the economy. So when people don't have access to water in their households and they have to walk hours to get water, it is in negative outcome or has adverse impacts on our economy broadly, or socioeconomic conditions. And so here what we're trying to highlight is that fiscal consolidation will disproportionately impact women and girls, because those are the people who undertake the disproportionate amount of household work. So as Treasury is considering, or not Treasury, but government considers gender responsive budgeting, it actually means that we have to take seriously this work that is not accounted for in gross domestic products calculations. And there are deep structural problems in the economy, which mean people are unable to have work, that people are unable to access certain basic services. People have to compensate in this economy with unpaid care work to be able to sustain themselves and their households. Next slide, please. Here, finally, we note to comment on the social wage. As the members are aware, in the NDP, a lot of the focus about how do we make South Africa better, how do we improve their socioeconomic conditions, really are around the question of providing basic services, but also this question of economic wage and the social wage that is required for households. And then here we say that this National Treasury states that the social wage is protected, and they define the social wage in a particular way. They include education, health, and so forth. However, we say that 61% of it, or rather, focusing on the 61% does not show the full picture. We've added an additional slide that shows the real per capita expenditure, and you'll see that in the medium term, the social wage is actually declining in real terms. It is not accounting for population and inflation growth, and therefore the social wage will not be what it is today, and it is not what it was in 2016, 2017. We also say that, the question we must think about, what are the values, why the social wage is defined the way it is. And we need to talk about how is it improving the living conditions of working people and their families. The expenditure is on all South Africans, so we cannot say the social wage is only for the poor, but it is actually for all South Africans. And actually, most of the time, certain people and those who are better off actually disproportionately benefit from expenditure from government. And so what is important is that past and current government expenditure has been providing institutional infrastructural platforms on which private provision of all of these areas are are dependent of, right? So these things are interconnected. And so, for example, even though there's private hospitals, medical aids, people do benefit from tax benefits from having medical aid. When people go also have private pension funds, also benefit from tax rebates in this area. So thinking about government expenditure and its fiscal incidence, how it actually impacts different groups, is critical in South Africa. And so it is not adequate to say that the social wage is sufficient to adequately address the needs of the majority, or rather the majority of those who are poor. Next slide, please. I'll hand over to my next colleague.
Thank you. Members, in terms of the this table shows the spending trends before and after the adjustments in a selection of national departments. Slow spending was one of the criteria that informed the amendments to the 2023-24 expenditure. The blue lines show the votes that received additional funding. In some instances, such as corporate governance, military veterans, human settlements, and tourism, the spending trends are still below the national benchmark of 50%, despite the reduction in the budget. Just for an example, public enterprises, before the reduction, the spending was on 41.8%, and after the reduction, it's 45.9%. Another example is tourism. Before the reduction, the spending in the first 6 months was 36.9%, and after the reduction, it's still below the national benchmark of 50. It will be at 37.8%. Next slide. This is in terms of the declared unspent funds. In corporate governance, 1.4 billion was unallocated. Funds in the local government equitable share to accommodate municipal tariff increases, and the 502 million of the 1 billion appropriated for the recapitalization of the land bank is suspended from Treasury's budget and included as part of a direct charge against the National Revenue Fund to cater for the government guaranteed debt obligation on behalf of the bank. In forestry, fisheries and environment, 100 million is declared on agency and support outsourced services due to the cancellation of a contract with training service providers for the expanded public works program. Next slide. Members, self-financing expenditure is when spending is financed from own revenue. This revenue is paid into the National Revenue Fund, and if self-financing expenditure is requested and approved by the Minister of Finance, these funds are allocated to specific votes or the votes that requested. In terms of government communication and information systems, they received 800 from their own revenue, and on the right-hand side, that column indicates the actual collection of revenue in the first 6 months of the financial year. In terms of Home Affairs, this might be a risk. They've requested 1 billion rand, but in the first 6 months of the financial year, the revenue collection was only at 425 million. In terms of correctional services, they requested 1 million, and they've already they have collected 122 million, which covers the 1 million that they've requested. Just another example is in defence. Members' Defence has already collected 578 million rand in the first 6 months. That it seems as if they will collect the 751 that they've requested. And Defence is actually collecting revenue in terms of reimbursements from the United Nations from this and the sale of equipment and space procured through the Special Defence account. Next slide. Members, again, a reminder of the criteria for the reduction, which is based on programs that has underspent in the recent years, and the instruction of Treasury to improve efficiency and reduce spending on consultants, venues and facilities, etc. Just an example, EPWP The criteria has not been adhered to, and there might be others as well. I'm just showing EPWP as an example. Members, EPWP is a program that creates work opportunities, which is necessary for poverty alleviation and employment creation. By March 2023, the program has created 14 million work opportunities since April 2004. And provincial spending on the conditional grant at the end of September was at 51.5%, which is more than the national benchmark of 50%, but this program has been reduced. The adjustment of 112 million to EPWP in 2023 comprised of 102 million due to unforeseen and economic financial events, and 9 million for virements and shifts within the vote, mainly from agency and support outsourced services in Program 3, the EPWP program in the department, and money was shifted to Program 1 to goods and services to pay for advertising, travel and subsistence, venues and facilities. So that is totally against the criteria and the instruction from the National Treasury. Next slide. Members, you always ask what the effect of the cuts are on service delivery. The following few tables, excuse me, show the achievement in the first 6 months of the financial year and the changes to the key performance targets as reflected in the budget document. Just to note is that many of the amendments are due to errors in the approved budget. So in the adjustments budget, those errors were corrected. In terms of Vote 12, Public Service Commission, in the Public Service Commission, the number of reports and leadership and human resource management practices development per year were reduced from 5 to 4, and the number of oversight reports on the implementation of the ethics framework per year was also reduced from 3 to 1 in the adjustments budget. So this might be the effect of the reductions, perhaps for consultants. In social development, the percentage of non-profit organizations registration applications processed per year within 2 months. So the department has already processed all those applications in the first 6 months. In terms of correctional services, the percentage of overcrowding in correctional facilities in excess of approved bed space capacity per year actually increased from the budget target that was 45. It's now been increased to 50. At the end of September, that percentage was already at 40%. In terms of agriculture, the number of land claims finalized per year, the original target was 459. That has been reduced to 406. And in the middle of the year, they've only reached 52. Number of subsistence and smallholder producers supported per year, that target has been reduced to from 120,000 to 100,000, and at the end of the September, they've only supported 7,000 small holder producers. Next slide. In terms of communications, the number of households connected as part of the National Broadband Plan has been reduced from 1.9 million to 882,000. And at the end of this September, they've only provided 897. In terms of mineral and resources, the number of derelict and ownerless mines rehabilitated per year, that is what I indicated, money was shifted to that outcome or output. So the target was 3. It's still 3, but at the end of this September, nothing has been done in terms of that. The number of additional households electrified with grid electrifications per year is 220,000, but mid-year they've only provided 55,000. In terms of science and innovation, at the bottom of this table, it shows the reduction in the number of bursaries per year that has been allocated. This is one example of the target that was actually reduced in the budget already. Next slide. In transport, the effect of the cuts are seen in the Department of Transport. You will see most of their targets has been reduced. And also another one to note is in water and sanitation, the number of small water service infrastructure grant projects completed per year, despite the reduction and despite the underspending, that target has been increased from 86 to 103. Members, the 2021 audited performance of conditional grants are also added as additional slides for your further information. Thank you.
Kagiso, are you coming in?
I'm coming in. Good morning and thank you, honourable members, for allowing us the opportunity to take you through the presentation. Next slide, please. Oh, this slide, yes. One of the bills that was tabled by the Honourable Minister on the 1st of November was the Eskom Debt Relief Amendment Act of 2023. To be able to understand what has been amended, it will be useful to take honourable members to what was tabled in the national budget as it pertains to Eskom. It was noted that it was announced that Eskom will receive 254 billion rand in debt relief over the next 3 years. Although this is not a direct comparison, but to try to put this figure into context and to understand the scale of the financial support, looking at a big picture snapshot of this situation, 254 billion rand would account for almost 6% of GDP. Now, the breakdown of the relief would be in 3 tranches over the medium term. 78 billion rand is meant to be dispersed in this financial year, 66 billion rand in the 2024-2025 financial year, and 40 billion rand in the 2025-2026 financial year. According to the medium-term budget policy statement, as of the 30th of September 2023, 16 billion rand, which constitutes about 21% of the 78 billion rand that was allocated for this financial year, has been dispersed to Eskom. The National Treasury now seeks to amend the Eskom Debt Relief Bill by proposing the following amendments. Number 1, converting the debt relief provided to Eskom from non-interest bearing form into one that accrues interest to more accurately reflect the cost associated with debt relief arrangement. Number 2 is empowering or enabling the Minister of Finance with the ability to reduce the amount of debt relief going forward if Eskom fails to comply with conditions aimed at protecting public funds. While not explicitly stated in the amendment bill, it was noted in the medium-term statement document that if Eskom does not meet the conditions contained in the debt relief arrangement, the loan would not be converted into equity at the end of the financial year. There are a few subsections to the amendment bill and other areas that we found would be important to bring to the committee's attention. First is the interest to be paid on the loan will be at a rate determined by the minister. At the public hearing presentation last week, National Treasury did note that the interest would be market related, but did not specify what the rate will be. Second, should it be determined that Eskom failed to comply with the debt relief conditions, the amounts reduced by the minister will apply to future advances to Eskom. Third is that the amount that could potentially be reduced may not exceed 5% of the total amount for the applicable financial year. Fourth, although also not stated in the bill, the operational conditions applicable to the debt relief will be included in Eskom's corporate plan. And in the interest of effective oversight, it would be beneficial for key stakeholders to have access to the conditions where possible. Lastly, is that a task team has been established to monitor compliance with conditions and report quarterly on whether Eskom is eligible for the conversion of the loan to equity. Next slide, please. While not going into detail, the slide essentially presents a summary of measurable energy reforms as detailed in the various chapters of the medium-term statement. The reforms are primarily focused on enhancing power generation capacity, such as a number of projects that are currently underway that are intended to add additional capacity to the grid from renewable resources, from private sector investment, and through returning of units to the power grid. But if I can kindly draw the honourable members' attention to the last item on the table. Here lies an important intervention which is dealing with municipal debt owed to Eskom. Essentially, municipalities have been offered debt relief for outstanding debt to Eskom up to the 31st of March 2023. By October of this year, 67 applications had been submitted, amounting to 56.8 billion rand, or about 97% of the total municipal debt owed. Of the applications received, 28 applications, or about 42%, have been approved. Next slide, please. So other developments detailed in the tabled document on state-owned enterprises that we'd like to bring to your attention includes SOEs that have been singled out as being in poor financial health. This includes Denal. In March of this year, 1.9 billion rand was dispersed to Denal through a Special Appropriations Act that was tabled in 2022. This disbursement was in proportion to Denal's share of proceeds from the sale of non-core assets. Denal has utilized the proceeds to settle the balance of its government guarantee debt, allowing government to revoke or to lift the guarantee. So simply put, this means that Denal has used the funds it received to pay off the remaining amount of debt that was backed by government guarantee. Although these processes have transpired, National Treasury has noted in the medium-term statement that Denal has not submitted its annual financial statements since the 2019-2020 financial year. This underscores an entity that is in a state of financial distress. On Land Bank was not able to meet its debt obligations in April 2020 and remains in a state of default. At the end of the 2022-2023 financial year, the National Treasury provided conditional support to Land Bank amounting to 5.1 billion rand. This was part of a larger 7 billion rand fiscal allocation. Government has wiped out its guarantee exposure to the Land Bank by settling 1.4 debt owed to all the Land Bank's guaranteed lenders. The remaining portion of the 7 billion rand fiscal allocation, which is yet to be transferred, will be provided to Land Bank in this financial year. The funds are earmarked for use in its blended finance scheme during March 2024. Next slide, please. Transnet's performance has been highlighted as underwhelming by National Treasury, with its operations strained by worsening financial state. The entity issued guarantee stands at 3.5 billion rand. As of March of 2023, the existing debt was 130 billion rand. Now, again, although this is not a direct comparison, but to try to contextualize the scale of this debt, this is almost 3% of GDP. Transnet faces serious operational challenges, which are largely due to underinvestment and inadequate maintenance over many years. Consequently, the entity's revenue and liquidity has been declining, which has negatively affected its profitability. In response, Transnet has begun to implement a 5-year capital investment program, which is estimated to cost 122.7 billion rand, of which 99.5 billion rand, which is about 81% of this budget, will be allocated for operational maintenance, and 23.2 billion rand, which is the remaining 19% of the budget, will be to expand infrastructure. Although the program could be a step in the right direction, it cannot be overstated that the entity is facing significant funding constraint because of its existing high levels of debt and poor profitability. Lastly, the South African National Road Agency received 23 billion rand in 2022 adjustment budget to aid in the rehabilitation and expansion of its toll road network. The agency plans to ask government for approval to advise its funding plan to ensure continued investment in the national road network. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Chairperson, thank you so much once more. I think we really think, but I think one of the really key message that comes out of our presentation here, Chair, is really to emphasize the importance that given that we see the context of declining many of the developmental indicators we set ourselves as a country, but also when you look at the 10-year review on the NDP as how far we've gone, that many of the targets have not been realized. Our emphasis really changes. So really to ensure that there's a better alignment between the planning on the one side in terms of the service delivery that it has to be in place, but also in terms of the economic development measures put in place on the one side, and also the on the other side, the budget framework itself to say how much we want to go in realizing these developmental outcomes, but also what kind of budget framework we need to have in place. And it's really our concerns that the current trajectory means that some of the progress we have made so far will be undermined over time. And there has to be realization that, or recognition, at least in this discussion, that this is what we want to do. Do we want to undermine the progress? Of course, there are inefficiency issues, we understand that, but I think the role of the budget is very important in dealing with socioeconomic issues, but also dealing with economic development. Chair, I just want to stop there and really thank you once more and the members and thanks the team as well. And we would wait for the questions, clarification questions. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Janchis and the team. Whatever sport you have decided to choose for your presentations this term, please make sure that you are glued into it. You don't change. You are so clear. Unlike times when
Noted.
Noted. Okay. But thank you very much. Welcome the presentation. Oral members, you know how we do it. Can I get indications of the oral members who would like to interact with the presentation?
Tobias.
Honorable Tobias. Thank you. Next, who else is coming?
Matafa.
Honorable Matafa.
Sheikh Imam, Chair.
Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Mlenzana.
Honorable Mlenzana. Honorable members, I've got Honorable Tobias, Honorable Matafa, Honorable Sheikh Imam, Honorable Mlenzana. Is that it? Okay. Let's go. Honorable T, please go.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, mine is very short. I need to be favored with a list of municipalities in Thabo Mofokeng and in the Fezile Dabi district that might have applied for the relief or not have applied for the relief from Eskom's electricity bill. If I can get those municipalities, just in those two, and especially I want the Ngwathe, but I want all municipalities in Thabo Mofokeng. If I can get the list of those that applied before the deadline or those that did not apply by the deadline, that's all, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Tobias. Honorable Matafa.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, team PBO members and guests on the platform. Chair, I will start first by acknowledging the presentation and apologizing for the quality of my voice. I'm still struggling with flu, but I just have 3 questions that I would want to pose. The first one, it's on the
Matafa, you sound like Isaac Hayes today. Continue.
Yes, that is what it is, Chair. On the first one, it's with regards to the issue of underspending. We know that the school infrastructure backlog grant is still underspent. There's a rollover, but not of the entire 260 million. As a committee, we've been following up on the sanitation program in order to eradicate pit toilets in schools. Can maybe the PBO indicate if whether they have picked up any progress in that regard, or will this program still be negatively affected by this underspending? And also just maybe if whether there was a sense of the schools without proper structures. We see a lot of pictures circulating, Chair, with students studying and writing exams under trees, but yet you still have an infrastructure backlog grant underspent. What could be the problem in that regard? And the same goes, Chair, to the Human Settlement Department. The PBO states that even after the budget cut, the percentage of spend is still below expectation. What is the problem there? Is there maybe a moving away from building RDP houses, or is there a reason that the human settlement is still underspending? The third one, Chair, is just on budgeting as a process. I was taught that whenever you budget, you must be realistic in how you budget. But the PBO states that water and sanitation, in one line item, I think it's small water projects, they had increased targets, but yet their spending is not anywhere near acceptable performance. So is it not unrealistic to put yourself at a target that you will not reach? And if the answer is yes, why would Treasury allow such a practice? And what is the view of the PBO as far as that particular practice is concerned? Chair, the last one is just a comment on the slide that speaks to the economic makeup and its actors, whereby the income inequality is being put as a challenge. The organization that I sit here for, Chair, has identified inequality as a challenge. But Stats SA indicates that for the private sector, Africans earn between 3 to 4% less than their European counterparts. And this report is persistent. Now, my question is, what can government do further to assist the private sector to move away from that particular, and I'll use the word discriminatory process of paying Africans less than what they deserve, given the fact that even the PBO and the FFC had commented in the previous engagement that with all the interventions that government has made in order to advance a conducive environment, we are yet to see the private sector investing in the economy of the country, investing in the factors that have been identified in the ERRP, and the economy is not feeling the positive impact of those particular measures. How can we as a government try and close that income inequality when we all know and agree that the private sector remains the major employer supported by government initiatives? That is my input, Chair, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to engage. I'll try to release an album whilst I still have this voice. Maybe it might say. Thank you, Chair.
Good luck. Good luck. Thank you, Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Good morning, Chairperson, and thank you very much, PBO, for your presentation. I'm not sure where to start, Chairperson, because I remain very concerned about the future of our children and the generations to come, given what is happening currently in the country. My first question to PBO is, do you perhaps know, I'm not expecting you to know, but perhaps if you can, if not future, tell us, what is the total debt exposure of this country, both national governments, provincial governments, local governments, including all state-owned entities and state-owned companies? You want a total figure as to what is the total amount that we owe, whether locally or internationally, to creditors. That would be my first. And that leads me to my next question. What do you believe, given what you have been seeing for the last couple of years, where every Minister of Finance that came in said it was fine to borrow, gave us examples of Japan and many others. So your debt to GDP is increasing, your debt service cost is increasing. What do you anticipate will happen? And when are you of the opinion that we might reach a journey of no return or a fiscal cliff, where it means we'll be bankrupt? And what are the implications of that? On the issue of the money that is spent on administration in the country, could you give me an idea whether you believe that we are doing just to the amount of money we spend on administration, and whether indeed we are getting value for money from that? That's the next question. I've got a few more, if you don't mind, gentlemen. I'm worried about the NHI, a brilliant thing. We all want it, we need it. There's going to be budget cuts there. We know that for the health department. We already know the challenges the Department of Health faces. What do you think, honest opinion? Can you see success of the NHI, or are we going to come back to these platforms in a matter of time and then take responsibility for exactly where we're going to find ourselves? That is a failed NHI system. Because primary health care is at an all-time low. You can't attract enough medical practitioners. Many people are leaving the country because of they can't. Can you imagine the amount of money we spend on training them, and then we're not even able to accommodate them, even though we need them because we have budgetary constraints, and they're leaving the country. So we're losing them. The other thing is the amount of money that we are leading to that is the amount of money we spend on training through student financial aid in this country. Most of these people, there's no restrictions, there's no requirements to serve the country or whatever it is, and there's no jobs for them. They are leaving the country. So we are taking taxpayers' money, training people, and then they're going and benefiting countries outside of South Africa. And tell us, how is that actually going to benefit? That's the next thing. On the issue of, I don't know if you are aware as to how far we are in terms of the zero-based budgeting that we have been talking about. Now, do you believe Treasury is doing enough in terms of illicit financial flows? I'm sure you're going to agree with me that 15% of the people who pay taxes in this country, it's like you're taking the blood out of the bone of these people. But yet, there is no compliance when it comes to foreign nationals who run businesses. Many of them trade in cash only, and large sums leave the country. There is no mechanisms to link them when they get a license from local government to the provincial and national to SARS. What is your view on that? And then, of course, you got big conglomerates in the country who are making profits but showing losses here and profits offshore, so they are moving the money across. So, do you believe that if Treasury does more, we can get a lot more revenue into the country to the extent that we might be able to lessen the burden on the 15% of the taxpayers? Are you worried that a lot of our skills are leaving the country? And what do you think is going to be impact of that? Because I can tell you the only people that are leaving are the people who are employed and who are paying taxes and got the experience and the skills, and they are being absorbed by the international community. There's a whole lot more, Chairperson. If there's an opportunity, I'll come back, but let me stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Sheikh. Honorable Lenzana, please come in.
Good morning, Chairperson and colleagues. Good morning, team, PPO, and all in the platform. Chairperson, let me start by appreciating the presentation by Dr. Changes and team. How is my audibility, Chair? Am I audible?
We can hear you, Honorable Lenzana. Please continue.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Chair, it's just a few things, even with me. I've decided to be generic as I was listening. Look, the first one, Dr. Chanches, is I'm battling, Chairperson, in my mind with this issue of cuts versus under expenditure. I have to be corrected here. Let me put it to you, Dr. Chanches, so that you can come back to me. My take is that when you are looking generally, particularly with your division of revenue, when you are talking nominal, you would say, yes, we are cutting, but when you are talking the real value of money in terms of rands and cents, there would be a situation where, for instance, you would see that in actual fact, there is in reality no budget cut or no money cut, let me put it like that, because this money that has been taken, I'm not saying cut, taken, is money which Treasury, when forecasting expenditure, would see that in actual fact, this is money unspent, and then therefore is shifted from one point to the other, where it would be spent better. If you can talk to that. Two, I want also, if you can talk more on, we once raised this, Honorable Mataf will remember, when we were talking of the auditors on the other part of our work, where we are with the Auditor General, the Standing Committee on the Auditor General, where we were saying these auditors owing Eskom, not Eskom, Auditor General, should be billed directly. When we appropriate money, it should go straight to where it belongs. Now, I am now talking about Eskom. I am now talking about municipalities, where you would have departments in particular owing Eskom, municipalities owing Eskom heavily. Is it not possible that without this continuous outcry of these debts, we, as we do appropriation, we pay directly all this money is owed? Same with departments owing municipalities. Is it not possible that you are able to say Matatiel municipality is owed more than 100 million by departments, and as such is now struggling to work perfectly? Service delivery is held back because of this debt. Is it not possible that when we appropriate come start of the financial year, April, we pay directly all those? Is it permissible? Or if permissible, is it thinkable? Is it doable? Can you advise as far as that is concerned? Now, there is this generic one. There is this generic one on the use of consultants vis-a-vis insourcing government services. On top of that, you top it up with the high level of unemployment. I believe these are in sync. There is synergy. Because look, you cannot have a situation where, Chairperson, you do not have human resource in service to deal with these issues, which then you move on to hire consultants. And consultants will, either by hook or crook, go hire and exploit those unemployed individuals. They hire them at low costs and all that. The standards of payment at that level are actually ignored. But then the same skill could have been taken direct from the unemployed into the government service, excluding or putting aside the consultants. At what stage are we looking into that? Are you, as team PPO, Dr. Chanch, is able to say to us, if we can stick into that? Of course, it will not take us, it's not an event, it will be a process. How much in terms of percentage spending would we save when we gradually put aside consultants and the private sector? Lastly, Chairperson, it's coupled with this. I want your comments, Dr. Chanch. There is a serious allegation out there which says this budget is neoliberal. All these good things that we are mentioning as have been done are clouded by the fact that we are now talking of a budget which is actually shrinking. And if then it is contracting or shrinking, it means then, by definition, it would be neoliberal, it would be against the notion of a development state and all. It would be against seeing service delivery being rolled out more quicker than what we see now. What is your take there? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Ndenzana. Honorable Kaiso, please come in.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. And let me also thank the Office of the PBO for the presentation which has been made before this committee. Honorable Chair, I think some of the issues here, we may find ourselves repeating ourselves, but I just want to check with the Office of the PPO because I think we are presenting for, or not just for the sake of presenting before this committee, but it means that something must be done in as far as we are concerned. Although I want to put a challenge in as far as the PBO has been doing this job of advising us on the recommendation. Have you also done, audited on your side as to your recommendations that have pushed through successfully, bullet by bullet, so that we know from your side that it's not only us who assess you, but do you think it's to what an extent is this recommendation are able to filtrate, to that particular direction in as far as your assessment or analysis is concerned? Let me first start with this one that I like to ask. At what point would you, or what is your understanding with regard to the the foreign exchange reserve, because I also want to believe that because we are talking about the issue of, shortage of, shrinking fiscal, fiscal. So, and we are to do with a lot of issues that, or compound the crisis. So now I'm checking with the PBO, what haven't you, had something to think of the foreign exchange reserve, its role when the country is now running into this deep crisis? What is your take with regard to that? Because I think it's one very important institution which we often overlook when there is a crisis like this one. And two is on the, well, one would like to really note the increase in the provincial equitable share, even though it is not enough. And now the issue on social wage, the 350, has changed a lot of lives of our own ordinary people. And they have actually created the hope that at least even if it's so difficult, very difficult, when any other state would think of to do or to take care of its own poor people, would say, okay, right, let me take some 350 and take you just a step further whilst you are struggling. So it is this one, the government has done it, very good one. So now the thing is, perhaps now because it seemed to have been working, if we are still a step ahead to basic income grant, then it means in the meantime there has to be an adjustment as a medium term plan, because the long term would be implementation of the basic income grant, which will try to resolve this, because all these reasons that the PBO has advanced in as far as the value of 350 versus the inflation has now had this impact. Now, I understand the issue of, the cuts, But like Honorable Mlenzana, I sometimes, for me, it doesn't make sense because when we are not saying the issue, another serious problem that perhaps the Treasury has to reign over it is this thing of agent as outsourcing, which it is, found in most of the departments, and at the same time you have employed the same, you have a staff, your own establishments, and plus additional outsourced budget that we have to fund. So it's a quite, it's a practice which is, found in majority of the, or in sizable portion of the departments have this practice. So it has not been reigned over because if you employed 10 people, you add 5 outsourced ones with extra budget. For me, it doesn't make sense what we are doing because these 5 people are doing the job of another 5 people in the same department. So you just ballooned your budget. So should we reign over this thing? It can save a lot of cost doing away with this. Now, the second, the other question that I want clarity to get from the PPO, maybe it's me who understand it very wrongly, or I misunderstood you. You say because of non-spending or underspending by a department, the budget was cut. So my understanding is that it is not actually the budget that was cut. It is a service which was cut because that service has not been implemented. It is only the money was underspent. So under those circumstances, where one would normally expect that, you didn't spend that money, so it means that service was not executed. So, okay, execute that service, and it means then the cut you won't be affected by the cut. So the instruction is you use that unspent money so that we don't cut you. We were supposed to cut you as a warning, but now, because you did not execute that task or implement that, take that money and then so that at the end, I understand now what did you cut actually there, because you did not. That money was not spent by that department. So it means when you remove it, you also remove that what was supposed to be spent. I'm saying, for instance, in the school backlog, Department of Basic Education, infrastructure backlog. So when the unspent money is cut, it means that particular service which was supposed to benefit from that money, it won't take place. So I'm now hence that question that I'm asking: what is the cut there? Because already the service was not actually spent. So what is the real cut? If there was a cut over a cut, then it must be clarified. No, there was a cut over a cut. So, Chair, if you look at I was so touched by the issue that the report or presentation raised around the issue of unpaid productive, unpaid work. So that these cuts have pushed a lot of pressure to women, unemployed, and doing unpaid work. Actually, generally, that is because why I'm raising this, because the challenges that we seek to resolve are these major three interrelated challenges, which is race, class, and gender. So you cannot remove one out of all what we see here. So they're always interrelated. So we are pushing a lot of pressure is being pushed towards the women because they are the ones who stays behind at home, trying to fend for the kids, making sure that these kids go to school, they have water, they are able to get some fuel, food, and they walk a distance because there's no integrated transport. It's very difficult to achieve. Well, I'm just indicating that it is not just a general statement that is just general card, but I'm saying whilst we resolve or seek to resolve all these problems, but mainly we are dealing with these three interrelated challenges that I've talked about. So each and every move that we are making, we must have a sense that how are these three interrelated relations are being resolved as we do in this cut. So, Chair, I have a problem with these departments that we have, the report presentation has talked about, the human settlement and tourism, that they, for the half of the 2023 performance in as far as, their budget has gone only to 30-something. And if you look at human settlement, it really formed the bulk of the services that our people are supposed to get, including resolving the issue of, human settlement and getting our people to houses and solve a number of problems there, including tourism. So if we had time, we would really have to, because now the problem is just consolidated into one big problem that we just see a round figure of 38% performance instead of above 50 performance. So it means there's a serious problem that we aren't being told what it is in those two departments. I just want to know, whilst we are presenting so nicely the office of the PBO, are there suggestions that you make? Because sometimes, yes, it's a problem that we now find ourselves as we are on this platform that we are in now, the countries we are in it. So, of moving out, what are your suggestions as what has been offered? What do you think at least we should have looked at, in as far as, getting some more money, etc. I didn't hear you touching other critical areas that perhaps you think this is a direction that perhaps Treasury should be thinking of moving towards, rather than taking that route which actually has impact on projects such as expanded public works program, informal settlement, taking care of that area and public transport grant, etc. Yeah. So I didn't get hold of. On Dinel audits, I think Dinel should be instructed to provide with the audited financial statement. It doesn't help to run away and submerge into deep water with the problems, but we have to come out of that deep water so that we are able to assist, because it doesn't make any sense for anyone who's listening that from since 2029, Dinel has a freedom of not reporting anything of any cent that we are appropriating. Is wrong. So there must be a report, and we know finally that Dinel has now audited a financial report, and it must be submitted to the auditor general. That report, it's required. I mean, we can't just be assisting just because we're an appropriations committee. We just wake up anybody and we hear anybody can pitch up into the committee and say, I don't have anything to tell you how much and how did I spend. Give me money. It shouldn't happen. So then, yeah, Chair, this is my input. Thank you very much, Chair, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable members, I'm going to give you the last round. If there's something that you forgot to raise, and then after that, I'll allow PPO to come in. Let me just check with honorable members. Honorable Tobias, do you have anything you'd like to add to your questions?
No, Chair, I don't have additional questions.
Thank you. Honorable Matafa, Isaac Hayes. Honorable Matafa. Honorable Sheikh Imam, you definitely have something you wanted to put. Honorable Sheikh Imam. Honorable Lenzana.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Honorable Sheikh Imam, I was asking whether you do have any additional questions.
Yeah, sorry. I just had a call from Protection Services at the same time. In terms of the underspending, thank you, Chairperson. In terms of the underspending, what do you think is the reason that these departments underspend? Do you think it is because of them not having a proper plan in place? And when money is allocated, they don't, or is it they don't have the necessary capacity? What if you were in charge of Treasury? What are the areas that you will decide to reduce spending on? If you can just highlight some of them that you think you'll start cutting expenditure. Like, I'll give you a good example. I will cut down on all overseas educational tours. I'll only allow it in the first year that MPs come in so that they'll be useful to them for the rest of the term to do the work, because you don't know whether MPs are going to come back or not. But going in the last term for me is sometimes and often a waste of money. Now, you do realize that, and you saw the reports coming from the Minister of Police, 8,000 detectives are short. The numbers that they had in the office as officers before and what they got now, despite the large increase in the population, taking into consideration that we have a crisis here with a population explosion with 91,000 children giving birth to children. What measures do you believe we need to put in place to contain this? But at the same time, in terms of growing the economy to be able to absorb the large population increase into society. If you can perhaps just tell us what do you think. Thank you, Chair. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Honorable Sheikh Imam. Ramlenzana, anything to add?
No, thanks, Chairperson. As if Honorable Imam has read my mind, but my question is not exactly his, but terminology might be some, there may be some commonalities. My question, Chair, would be, there was a talk on Treasury informed by the Stats SA results, census results. What can Dr. Janches tell us? The impact of the census results into budgeting going to, because look, we have to be focusing. We are talking now about this, but here comes budget 2024 around the corner. So what we do now, as we will be adopting these three bills, has also to be informed by what we will be doing come 2024 February, going towards April. So I just wanted them to talk broadly on the census results. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Lenzana. Honorable Kaiser, do you have anything to add?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just one issue that I forgot to talk about. The issue of slow spending of agricultural grants. I don't know. I want to check from the PBO as to what sort of reasons which you found or your research found with regard to this being a problem, or that you pick up in as far as that department it should have slow spending. Because you remember the issue of land. It's one area that's supposed to alleviate poverty, because our people will be able now to I'm just making an example, at a small scale farming. I have farmers around my constituency in Tabanshu up in arms around issue of of lack of support, etc. So those are the emerging farmers. But then you have the department have this as a slow spending taking place to it's very I mean that's poor spending. It's a serious problem. Whilst our people have a number of things that we're actually expecting from the department to support them. So I don't know what have you made out of that kind of a slow spending, because I can equally it can at the end of the day equal to underspending actually. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Let me welcome the presentation from PBO. Let me just add to some of the questions. I've been making comments and questions along the way. Dr. Chanchis, let me start by saying that in the presentation, I think we're not saying much about the reasons for cutting expenditure, right? We're not saying much. We're mainly focusing on the implications of cutting. Just for completeness, let's say that there was under collection by the receiver, right? So that's important, which is a function of the economy, which is not growing at the rate that it's supposed to grow at. Therefore, I would have expected that you would have spent some time on how do we deal with the source of the problem, the economy which is not growing, with all the implications that we are talking about now. I know that in the last presentation by PPO, you did touch on that, but I think that should be the theme, because as we know that the cuts can't be permanent. Permanent solution is us trying to get the economy. So perhaps the first question is: do you think that the provinces and the municipalities understand their role as far as economic activity is concerned, or economic growth is concerned, so that they can also contribute in economic growth in the ERP in general? And in your view, what is it that the provinces could do better and the local government can do better to try and help the process of economic growth? Another question, what was the reason that was advanced to reduce spending on expanded public works program? Again, the change in the water infrastructure grant to national from local government. Please, can you expand on that, the reasons which are being advanced, and what's your take on them? Another question: when was the last time that the minimum wage was adjusted upwards? Next question. When we talk about the SRD grant, in the past 2 years, I think there were monies that were returned. If we could just refresh our memories, how much was the SRD grant underspent with? Dr. Nelia, on slide 30, I would like you to go back to that slide and just talk to it again. I want to get the message that you are conveying to us. Then on slide 36, which I think it's something that as appropriations we must take cognizance of, that there have been an increase in energy available factor, I think up to 60%. You remember that amongst the things that we spoke about, for instance, when we were talking about the Eskom debt relief and the other recapitalization programs that we have made at Eskom, we said wanted to see improvement in the availability of electricity at Eskom. When I'm saying we, I'm saying the people of South Africa, when they put their money there, it's very critical that there should be some improvement. I think we need to talk about that because there is a slide. Let's talk more about it, because for me, those are the green shoots, again, which are going to help with the question of economic growth. I think it's given that without electricity, it's going to be difficult to grow the economy. But the improvement in the EAF, it's very important, because it will make the firms start doing their work, creating jobs, and SARS getting more money. And again, that may reduce the expenditure that we're talking about. But can you go back to that? I think that was slide 36. On Transnet, in our interaction with Transnet, we had an oversight at Transnet and interacting with the minister. One of the contributory factors in Transnet not being able to execute its mandate was the question of the availability of the locomotives, especially the standoff between China and Transnet. I don't know whether, but that reason was very conspicuous when we were busy trying to deal with the cause. But when we interacted with Transnet, that standoff between China and Transnet was a big contributory factor. And there was a time when the minister was going to China to try and resolve this, because it was even impacting the availability of spare parts of the locomotives that we already had in South Africa from China. So I just want to check, one, to agree that that's one of the biggest contributing factors to the underwhelming performance by Transnet, and two, how far are we with the resolution of that matter, if you know. Thank you very much. Dr. Chanchis and your team, please attend to the questions. You only bring back the meeting to me once you have attended to all the questions. As you know, we always say that for those questions that you are not able to give answers now, we don't want convenient answers, say so, and then you can always bring back the answers once you have researched on them. Thank you very much. Dr. Chanchis.
Thank you so much, Chairperson and members, for the very questions that we got, and also for the guidance. And thank you so much. I'll touch on some of the questions, and we'll definitely do that, Chair. We do send follow-up questions as well, and I think the committee will also guide us on questions that are outstanding so we can respond to them. I think we will definitely look at the list of the municipalities. We have not looked at that in detail, which have applied or specifically to those ones, but I'll let the team to answer. Where we don't have it, we'll send the list, Chair, on the Thabo Mofokeng area. There are common themes in some of the areas. I'll try to talk to some of the issues in a common way, and the colleagues will fill in the gaps. I think the issue of the underspending vis-a-vis the cut. I want to start by saying one of the reasons why we also undertaken this longitudinal study around underspending different spheres of government was precisely to try to provide more information for discussion around using the underspending as a way to justify the cuts. And I think our points here, it's really to say, members are correct that even if you cut underspending, it doesn't. Even if you reduce spending or cut whatever limiting measure you use, the fact remains that in reality, the spending on specific areas is lower than when it was in the previous year. Even it's expected to be lower in some of the areas specifically there. But we're saying the reducing this spending because of the underspending, it doesn't solve the problem because the service delivery requirements are still in place, and we are far behind in realizing our target steps of business plan in terms of the national development plan, and it has to be more than just cutting. It has to be more consideration around the space. But I think what we're trying to emphasize around the spending in our briefs on underspending is really to say we need to address the challenges that lead to underspending, because some of them are really broad issues, that the issue of vacancies, critical vacancies in some of the vacancies in some of these areas, the issue of leadership, some of these areas. In my view, we need to make sure we have proper people leading these organizations, entities. Otherwise, you will have some of these challenges that are persistent. The issue around the compliance with the crucial grants as well. The issue around difficulty in completing projects, and so on. So there's so much variety of questions that says whether even the procurement complexities, the delays in paying suppliers, and so on. Those are some of the key challenges that, in our view, they impact service delivery. And it's important that even if we cut expenditures, we get an understanding from government what would that mean for service delivery or economic development measures. That's really a very important consideration, and that's our reasons for having that underspending project and to inform discussions. Basically, we offer the idea that just using that and cutting underspending, it's not enough. There has to be clear understanding or clear planning dealing with some of these challenges, rather than just use them as a way to cut expenses, but also the realization that some of these underspendings will always be there regardless of what measures in place. Just inherent in the nature of the activities or government activities that takes place, and how much of those will always have to readjust the budgets and all of that. So that's a message that I'll let the team to fill in some of the gaps there. The issue around the transformation, it's an worrying factor for us, to say that you need to transform the economy and deal with some of the inequalities in some of the structure. We talked about private sector. I think the government has have various regulatory bodies that deal with these matters. Talk about BE Commission. I think that will also enable Parliament to really ask more questions to say, how far the sectors are in realizing the transformational targets, and what is the role of these regulatory bodies should come to this committee and respond to say, what are the sectors doing? The financial sector, there are issues there. There are, chartered as a set out to say, this is how much you have to realize transformation in the sector. And I think it's right for this committee to invite those entities to respond to the issue of transformation and how far are they willing to move. And it has to be punitive measures as the legislation and empowers these entities to actually impose punitive measures on these entities. The issue of borrowing and the debt, we spoke about it quite length last week, but I think the point here, which I don't dwell a lot on it, but yes, we have probably accumulated a lot of debts over time. But I think the question for us is to say, how do we see this debt? How we're realizing, or we close, and we agree that variety of issues have to consider in trying to reduce this reliance on debt and getting more revenue sources. And we think we are opportunities for more revenue base. In our view, there should have been, a windfall tax imposed during this period where we show sectors that have really generated more profits, which they didn't earn. I mentioned financial sector last week. I mentioned energy sector. That should have been an opportunity for windfall tax in our view. But again, the debt, chair members, we said government debt is not only an expenditure problem. It's not only an expenditure problem. It is also an interest rate problem. But it is also a economic growth problem. And our concern is that we only focus on one side of it. We need to grow the economy to get this debt ratio down. And also interest rate itself, regardless of how much cut of expenditure we do, as long as the growth is lower than the interest rate is higher than the growth rate, we'll always have higher debt, debt growing higher regardless of whatever cut we do in expenditure. So I think that's a very important message to say, let's grow the economy also as much as we do with some measures, but let's identify other sources of revenue that would ease pressure in that regard. We have not looked at NHI in detail. We have not had a study on NHI, but I think the message I want to, message we highlight is that the way our healthcare sector is, it's unsustainable for the kind of society we want to have in terms of the constitution, in terms of other consideration, and mechanisms that try to reduce inequality in healthcare services has to welcome in a broader scheme of things. And I think that's really Mr. on a leave for that point. The issue of additional revenue, we still believe that there should be other mechanisms, which in a way, importantly, it doesn't perpetuate inequality, doesn't perpetuate, in a way we should consider less regressive measures. And as I say, there are areas in our view, and also maybe the issue of illicit fund flows, the committee can invite us to really respond to, but we have written about this in our text brief earlier to show that some of these areas, even the expenditures where some of the tax expenditures, I know government has talked about last week, there are spaces where some of the tax expenditures not really led to outcomes that we wanted. And those expenditures can provide opportunity to widen the tax space as opposed to leave it, as opposed to focusing on one side of the budget in particular. The issue of, there's a point that comes out, which is very important also, around the state essay informing the budget. I think that's, for me, Chair, it's really the heart of the conversation around, when I talk about the divergence between your planning on one side and the budget framework on the other side. That's important. And I agree with the honourable member to say, when you look at the multidimensional poverty index itself, it does provide some of the more substantive insight in terms of which sector of society, which areas, where have more high poverty, or some of these issues that come in. We look at the multidimensional protection index, which in a way, the question has that inform some of the budget provisions that I put out. And I think our argument here is strong to say there hasn't been clear evidence that has informed some of the budget provisions. And that's the message that I'm concerned about, and I think we should really raise this, particularly also when we listen to some of the points we raised last week, that the proposals, in a way, they even undermined the priority set out in the State of the Nation address earlier in the year by the president, to say these are the areas we need to focus on, and that has not really come out quite strong. And I think that's a message you said there has to be better alignment between the planning on site, this area, and also the budget framework. And I think it's a very important message raised by honourable member. The point around the consultants, I know many members raise issue around consultants. It is a very interesting question for me, because in this, it's a very loaded point, consultants, because in there are so many layers in a way that there are genuine cases where departments don't have capacity, or entities don't have capacity, or they need efficiencies where you need to really, which goes back to point as raised at the beginning, to say We need to make sure we've got proper people in these places, particularly such roles who are well qualified, can run these entities. Otherwise, they'll always be forced to look at the consultants. And whether you reduce the consulting fee and so on, it's really a very loaded question to say, what do we even mean by that? Because there are genuine cases. For example, we've been talking about triple P, I mean, public-private partnerships. That's a consultants. How much of it do we see it as a more targeted issue? Maybe there has to be consultants more a targeted issue. You need be, but really deal with the broader sense of why many entities have consultants while they have employees in there. And I agree, insourcing will mean more people are employed, but at the end of the day, you need services to be delivered. You need these entities to realize their goals and their objectives. The few points before I give to the team to come in, I agree. I'm concerned. One of the things I've set out earlier in the years, I need to see the impact of the office that we do. And I think I said it last week, it's areas that it will make me happy to realize how far our work has really contributed to oversight in this regard. But I think, as I said on our issue last week, that we need resources to be able to do that. And I think to a great extent, I feel that the conversations have changed a bit to a certain extent, where we get response that respond to specific issues that we raise in the regard. And that, for me, it's an encouragement that there is recognition that the work that we do by various stakeholders, it does contribute to oversight. But I agree, we want to have reports annually that says this is the impact of our work, but we require resources to be able to do that in that regard. The issue of foreign exchange resources, we have not done work on that, but I think there has to be, all the options have to be considered given where we are in the state. In our view, that reserves has to be considered, and how such, because South Africa will not be the only country doing that. Other countries have done so. It has to be considered how much of it can be used to alleviate pressure in the public finances. Probably required to do a lot of work as a team. And we have said it many times, 350 has worked, and we think it's a good example that if government put a policy that's similar to that, you are like to see huge impact. And we agree there has to be very clear consideration in terms of how much over long term such a mechanism should be in place, but not be seen as a burden, but into public finance, but seen as an economic policy strategy, because dealing with poverty, inequality, and all some of these challenges, in a way, it supports the economy itself, but also it alleviates from future spending, whole health, and so on. So that has to be seen as part of economic development, but also the fact that it leads to more demand in the economy, because one of the challenges that we have, in our economy is not only supply side, but also huge demand problem in our economy, and hence we see a lot of lack of growth in some of the areas as well. And lastly, I'll come in later, it's the issue around the lack of growth. It is an important part, and you understand that, and we also argue that lack of energy security has been on the issue that leads to low growth. Also the issue of transport, rail, and so on. But I think even before then, my concern, Chair, and we have talked about as a team, is that, I wouldn't want us to, relegate the problem of our economy to just these issues. We've always had a problem with lack of growth, even before COVID-19. And I think we have raised that argument to say the structure of the economy itself doesn't support a lot of growth. And we need to really, maybe, as you say, Chair, make sure that the various sectors play a role in trying to regionalize or localize economic activities, the local government, and so on, and use all the state capabilities to think about public procurement as one example. It has to be seen that how much local government, municipalities, and provinces can still use that support the economy within the regionalized area. But in our view, the heart of it, underinvestments and lack of support for household, it's also an important determination that can drive us further into the next area, into a more growth path for time, and more so that we've seen over the year evidence that shows that more government consumption, more government state-owned investment, and leads to more growth. And we have seen evidence that we've actually both the sectors, private sector, government, and also state-owned entities who have not really lived or invested the levels that we've set ourselves for in the NDP. And that for us, it's very important that we take as a way of getting a new growth path, which refers a lot to more investment, more consumption, and more support households, and also dealing with the climate change risk around climate change in a more predictive way. Chair, I want to stop there and ask Dr. Orlando, Dr. Mohammed to come in, and the team to come in as well. I'll see which questions are left out. Thank you so much. Dr. Orlando?
Thank you, Dumisani. I will talk about the different grants, but Mapula will also expand on the additional slides that we've added to the presentation on our analysis of the spending and performance on the 2021 conditional grants. I just want to add something on the human settlement grants. It is in slide 47 and 48, but also in terms of human settlements, there are such a lot of role players in terms of providing human settlements. We've got the National Department transfer all the grants, the provincial department transfer some of those grants to local government. So, and there are also other role players in terms of implementing agents. We've got the National Housing Financing Corporation. We've got the Social Housing Regulatory Authority. There's such a lot of stakeholders. I think that also creates a lot of inefficiency. That also delays the processes in terms of providing housing. But Mapula will also expand on some of the reasons. There was a question on the NHI. I'm not going to say a lot about NHI, but members, I've also indicated previously that we cannot provide national health service. I know they're focusing on the national health insurance, and one of the biggest achievements that the department actually indicated in terms of the national health insurance was that they've created 7 chief director positions to manage the national health insurance. But we don't have enough hospitals or clinics actually to provide that service. That is my view in terms of the national health insurance. In terms of the move from the regional bulk to water services, they don't really provide a lot of reasons why, but the department indicated that the move was to, it's on slide 13, to manage contractual obligations, budget pressures, accruals and payables for projects in several municipalities. That's why they moved the money from the bulk infrastructure to the water and sanitation. And then, and members, just in terms of the criteria for the main criteria was the underspending for the current costs. And that is what they've used to determine. Treasury also indicated that it's not a one-size-fits-all, that all departments are going to be cut by a specific percentage. That's why they actually use the underspending to guide them in terms of the way to reduce or to cut some of the current expenditure. And then Honourable Buthelezi asked on to explain slide 30. Honourable Buthelezi, this is basically to show the changes that have been made in the adjustments budget on the targets that departments have set in the budget. So no, those targets has been changed. I suppose they've made changes, they've reduced some of their targets due to this cut in expenditure. Yeah, so in terms of the public service, they've reduced the reports that they normally produce from 5 to 4 and from 3 to 1. In terms of correctional service, they indicated that their facilities will, they won't be able to provide more because they're already 50% overfull in terms of bed space. And in terms of agriculture, there's also a few of the targets that they've reduced. It might be because of the budget cuts. But it also, you can also see they've reduced their targets since the budget, but they've also very slow on what they've achieved after 6 months of the financial year. So I think Mapula can also expand on some of the reasons that of her analysis that they've given for underspending, specifically in terms of the agriculture grant and also the issues with the education infrastructure grant that have been reduced. Mapula, you can take over from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelia. So in terms of the education infrastructure grant, especially the school infrastructure backlog grants, when we look at our 2021-2022 performance on these grants, our
Mapula,
analysis show that.
Jonah, bring your video on as well.
Oh, okay. So I'm concentrating on the. Yeah. So our analysis showed that they spent 100% of their budget that was allocated or transferred to them, which was 2.3 billion. But the issue here is that there were no targets set in terms of the expected outputs. So we are not sure in terms of they spent 100%, was this what they were supposed to spend on? Because if there are no targets set, it makes it difficult to measure the performance against the planned outputs. So also the other issue was that they were supposed to build new schools, provide the schools with water, provide the schools with sanitation, and provide the schools with electricity. So they were able to build 21 schools, 112 schools were provided with water, 1,019 schools were provided with sanitation, but there were no schools that were provided with electricity. And 100% of the budget was spent. So it makes it difficult to know in terms of were they supposed to provide for this because there were no targets set. So that's the issue that we see in terms of the education infrastructure backlog. And in terms of the reason for underspending on the agriculture conditional grants, so we're still on the same analysis for the financial year 2021-2022. The reasons that we got for the underspending on these grants, for the comprehensive agricultural support, the reasons were like delayed delivery of IT equipment by service providers. This was due to the effects of COVID-19 and procurement challenges, delays in e-tender procurement processes. They were unable to use a contractor to complete the project, and unavailability of service providers. And then for the Litsima or Ilima grant, the reasons for underspending were procurement challenges, non-responsive service providers delaying the procurement finalization, service providers turning down offers owing to lack of capacity or cash flow, delays in e-tender procurement processes, and heavy rains due to the later part of the third season. So, and for the land care program grant, the reasons were problems with payment to labor teams by the appointed paymaster, slow internal procurement processes, late start of projects and delays in supply chain management processes, and late implementation of land care project. So it was mainly basically the issues with procurement and SCM, and in terms of the maybe because of communication between the service provider and the departments, because there were issues whereby the service provider was non-responsive, or the service provider turning down the offer later on because they did not have capacity. And also these were the reasons that we found for the underspending in terms of the agricultural grants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mapula. Let me just take Busi, and then we can come to Saj later. Busi, do you want to come in?
Sorry about that. There's a lag in my computer for some reason. I'll just take some of the few questions that were raised. The one was on when was the minimum wage adjusted? So it is adjusted on the 1st of March, was adjusted on the 1st of March 2023. And the adjustments have basically been annually. But of course, you know, the question was it even set at an appropriate level to begin with, but that's beyond the scope of what we are talking about here. I wanted to quickly respond in terms of the conversation around population growth and fertility rates, so to speak, or the population of South Africa. I think what has been important with Stats SA data that we've noted this year is that the projected population growth, or where we thought the population would be, is actually higher than previously. So that means that the real per capita expenditure is even less per person than before. So as you know, last year, the mid-year population statistics would have said we had 60 million, but of course, now the census data from last year, or that has come out now, says the population is actually 62 million. But also to say that population growth in South Africa is not expanding rapidly, as we might believe. In fact, you know, our population growth is below 1.5% on average over a period of time. I mean, we looked at the last 4 years before COVID-19. But if you think about fertility rates as well, they've declined from 2.66, the total fertility rate, down to 2.54 in 2022. So actually, we're not seeing a booming size in our population, but it does mean, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that we need to budget for the population that we do have, because if we don't adjust our expenditure to population, it means you've got less and less resources per person over time. The question on the SRD underspend, just to remind members that in the MTPPS last year, there was about 5.5 billion shifted away from the Department of Social Development. 3.7 billion of this was declared as unspent funds, and, or let me just, well, I should have shown you the slide, but it's okay. 1.8 billion actually was declared as unspent funds and projected underspending, and the remainder of the amount was shifted between votes. And as of the budget this year, early this year, and the MTPPS now, the revised estimate on the expenditure on the SRD is lower. And what is driving that is, again, what we've mentioned before, is that when they changed the eligibility criteria, it meant that fewer people qualified for the grant. So the quote unquote underspending is as a result of the exclusion of many people from accessing the grant because of the stringent criteria. So I think this brings to the question of where some policy itself drives under expenditure, right? So because they changed the criteria, it led to DSD spending less. And so, you know, there are nuances in why we see underspending. And of course, colleagues have already spoken about this, but even, you know, this question of underspending driven decisions to cut budgets or to move budgets away or to shift budgets away. Treasury itself has admitted in the past that sometimes when you take away money from a department, it actually makes the programs less efficient. And I think that's something that we have to pay attention to, because one of the things we're seeing in the HESA in terms of health, in Gauteng particularly, they'd spent 100% of the money, but the outcomes weren't what they were meant to be. And the problem was that there just weren't adequate resources to begin with to meet the targets. So even though they were spending the money, it wasn't enough to do what it was supposed to do. In terms of illicit financial flows, and I'll be brief on this one, we have shown in our tax briefs, as our director has stated, that the OECD estimates that $3.5 billion to $5 billion, which is about 1% to 1.5% of South Africa's GDP, leaves the country. And this is an estimate. Nobody really knows what the real true size of illicit financial flows are. But that amount of money is leaving South Africa. So we agree, we've written to say that, you know, of course, illicit financial flows are an important area to get more resources, so to speak, but also acknowledging that, you know, the tax base in South Africa includes everybody, and that everybody effectively is a taxpayer, and how do we redistribute resources more effectively? And then I think lastly, I will talk about just Oh, in terms of the health or NHI, not to say, but NHI and healthcare sector in South Africa broadly, I think it's important that we acknowledge that even the private healthcare sector, as it currently stands, is subsidized in many ways by public expenditure. And so not to see private sector health as, you know, a standalone sector that does not need government support or that does not receive government support, including the recipients of it, right? The recipients of it are benefiting from the system, and as already noted, through tax rebates and so forth. And so when we think about things like NHI, it is important that we think about how the current systems are interacting, the public and the private, to basically provision this healthcare. You know, it's a question about how many people who might go to, you know, sub or cross utilize resources. And so we can't look at it in a singular lens to say, you know, people who use medical aid exclusively use medical aid and they are the ones who exclusively pay for it. And therefore that's why that system works. That system works because, like already noted by some of the members, because there are doctors that are subsidized by the state to study who end up in the system, and there are all these other interacting factors. So, and lastly, I already said lastly, but yeah, I think, you know, the questions on unpaid care work, we have written quite a bit on unpaid care work in our pre-MTBPS briefs. So to really point to that information on really how we can start taking these things seriously, and combined with unpaid care work is the question of underpaid work, which one of the members has already mentioned, this discriminatory practices. And just to highlight that in this, you know, women on average in South Africa, according to Stats SA, earn 35% less than their male counterparts. And so thinking about underpaid work and unpaid work collectively, and how these systems collectively impact women and, you know, and girls and so forth, is also important to how we think about how our systems of provision, particularly basic public service provision, work to support communities rather. Thank you.
Kagiso, do you want to come in? SOE is a lot of question on SOEs.
I thought I'd give Dr. Mohammed a chance first.
Okay, Siraj, you come in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rasani. Thank you, Honorable Chair and members. Yeah, I just wanted to answer the question about what is South Africa's total public sector debt. I took a quick look at the September this year most recent quarterly bulletin, and it's our net public sector debt, consolidated public sector debt, so that includes all the entities and spheres of government, is 5.8 trillion. And the total, for the total economy, including the private sector, it's 45 trillion. And the good news is that in the total economy, our financial liabilities are lower than our financial assets, which they estimated around 49 trillion. So yeah, but I think, you know, just thinking about the size in rand terms of debt isn't necessarily, you know, going to take us as far as we need to go. We need to think about how that debt's being used, where it's being allocated, and is it being allocated towards dealing with the kind of problems that are going to solve people's, bring people out of poverty, but also increase their productivity and contribution to the economy, and then also support the transformation of the economy. And that brings me, I think, to the question about whether the budget is neoliberal and the accusations that the budget is neoliberal. And I thought I should answer that because I'm within the PBO, I'm the one person who's most likely to use the term neoliberal and to explain what that means within the academic literature and others. I mean, the broad definition of neoliberal is reducing a kind of ideological view that you want to reduce the role of the state within the economy and move towards more market-based activities. And there's a kind of myth that goes with it that you're moving towards what's called free market activities, but it doesn't take into account the level to which ownership and wealth is concentrated within economies. And this is globally, we've seen concerns from, the famous book by Thomas Piketty measures from the Gini coefficient globally and Palmer index, etc. There's a huge concern with the levels of global inequality within countries and also across the world. And so thinking about neoliberalism it actually ends up being a system where large financial corporations, large non-financial corporations, and now active more globally have more free reign, and it's gone with liberalization of financial markets. It's gone with trade integration and liberalization of trade. There's been pressure for capital controls to be reduced, and many countries have gotten rid of capital controls. So corporations and the rich are more able to take their money out, invest in other places. Now, with regard to macroeconomic policy and fiscal policy, one of the ways in which you reduce the role of the size of the state in the economy is by getting the state to spend less and less, to tax less, to become more reliant on debt, but also to spend less into the economy. And with that goes this kind of view, which isn't always true, that the state is inefficient and the market can do it better. The state doesn't create jobs, the private sector creates jobs. But it doesn't look, as just using the example that Busi just mentioned, in terms of private healthcare, how reliant they are on the platform and backbone, the infrastructure, the training, the legislation, the regulatory activities, the deciding what is a system, a viable system of national healthcare, standards for pharmaceuticals and foods, and the environmental standards. The whole private healthcare system is based on that. It couldn't exist without public sector and public sector spending, and the really good work being done. And one of the people on President Ramaphosa's economic advisors is this fairly famous economist worldwide. She's worldwide famous for work on one of the books that brought her to famous called The Entrepreneurial State. It's Mariana Mazzucato. And she basically deals with this kind of view that comes from neoliberal thinking, that the state is inefficient and the market is good. And she shows that when it comes to things like the iPhone and mobile phones, almost every technology linked to the 4IR, the ITC revolution, etc., it was made possible because of investments by the state in research and development and other kinds of support, but the profits are being privately appropriated. And that, I think, is an important way to think about how do we develop a developmental state in South Africa, and can we do it by keeping our deficit low, linked to this kind of and fiscal consolidation and austerity linked to this kind of ideology that the state shouldn't really be involved in the economy, the market should be left to it, when we know that the market isn't going to provide for the poor for their basic services. And also what we learn from Professor Mazzucato's kind of work is that even really large blue skies investments in things like the internet, in things like cell phone technology, etc., the state actually has to play an entrepreneurial role and provide that kind of resources and backbone for the technology development, to have a national system of innovation in a country for that to happen.
Dr. Siraj,
yes.
I know once you get into that topic.
Okay. So I'm actually about to come to your question about the reduction in government earnings and link it to that overall as well. So if I can have another 2 or 3 minutes, is that okay, Honorable Chair?
No, perfect. Come in.
Okay. So I was just sort of giving that background and also to explain why one or many people would be justified in arguing that the current approach to fiscal policy in South Africa is neoliberal, but also the need to think broadly about what that means. Now, Honorable Chair, you raised the question of the reductions in tax revenue and other places because of GDP declines and others. And I think this is really important also for linking to the overall developmental role of the state that has become eroded. And we think less about the role of the state in development, I think because of this kind of pressure from neoliberal thinking, that we need to actually think about long-term what it means that we become so reliant on the commodity cycle. And we're seeing that the reason why we've had this decline in revenue is because we now have less exports from the financial sector, from the mineral sector. And a lot of the argument has been that from the PBO is that the government's focus on structural reforms doesn't look at how we transform the economy and how we support that transformation away from being reliant on that we actually grow our industrial base, we become less reliant on cyclical commodity prices, and we have more value added overall in our economy with productive services and productive manufacturing sectors that then and part of the way to go there is to think about what contribution households make to GDP. And in South Africa, we see over 60% of GDP is from household consumption. And we know that lots of that consumption isn't actually only for consumptive purposes, but it's to raise children, it's to keep people fed and keep people productive, to provide shelter for people so that they can actually go make a contribution to the economy. Even some people are forced to use their houses as spaces for trying to start small micro businesses, etc. And so we really need to think about how, and this is where I differ with the Treasury, that we need to shift towards a demand side thinking of the role that improving the situation of households can contribute to a long-term vision and plan for economic transformation. That is not only by reducing government's debt that business becomes confident in the economy and thinks, oh, the government's credible and now we're going to invest more. The investment and job creation is induced by the demand of households. And currently we have a huge deficit in demand that's causing the problem. So the long answer, I think, to your question, Honorable Buthelezi, is that we can't then focus on saying every time revenue comes down, we need to cut spending. We need to actually have a fiscal policy that's linked to a developmental vision of how we improve the resilience and the economic activities of households, but also then supportive of growth and development and economic transformation. I was going to talk about illicit flows and other things, but I think that has been covered. And if there's anything that I need to further add to, we can always give written responses as well. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thanks, Raj. Kagiso, can I quickly talk about the SOE matters? Thanks, Raj.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yankees.
Chair, before Kagiso come in, is it possible for me to make a comment based on what Dr. Siraj just said? Just a comment, if you allow me.
No, let's allow Kagiso to finish. I'll allow you after that to come in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I agree with the Honorable Buthelezi that improvements of the energy availability factor is commendable, but not to be a Debbie Downer when you consider that, we come from an EAF that used to be around 81% in 2013 and 2016. We do still have a bit of a road ahead, but improvements are very much, commendable and welcome. On the Transnet matter, the dispute between Transnet and China Railway Rolling Stock Corporation over the delivery of parts and components for Transnet locomotive has not been resolved to our understanding. There is speculation as to why the deadlock has not been resolved, but to appraise some of the members is that one of the key issues is that over 90 locomotives had to be delivered to Transnet between this year and next year by the Chinese corporation. They haven't been delivered as yet because of tax clearance issues, as well as other issues that maybe the SARB might be in better position to share. This has contributed, of course, to the operational setback of the entity, but the issues within Transnet are far also beyond this particular operational setback. It's also some of the factors that we have outlined in the presentation that have contributed to underperformance are issues around, the infrastructure theft, as well as inadequate maintenance. And even this, I stand to be corrected, I think this year, there was also an increase in the irregular expenditure that was reported in the entity's annual report. So it's one of the matters, but it's not a whole complete picture as to why there's been a poor performance of the entity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I think one of the point, sorry, Chair, I looked at the questions that were answered. We have the one on public works program, which we will do a write-up on that, and the one on the direct payment to Eskom from entities will do sort of write-up on that. I think one of the point I wanted to add, Chair and members, on what Kagiso just said, one of the issue also that came up from Transnet is the issue around the employment voluntary retirement program, which I think there has been, understanding that led to many engineers, even those who not qualified to retire, to retire as a consequences. You had limited capability of the entity to try to deliver on that, and some of them came in later on as consultants, and that really impacted the ability of the entity to really operate, as many of the key skilled labor force had to retire to cash into the voluntary retirement program, and that also impacted the entity in dealing with the issues. But I think we can provide more detailed write-up also on this. I think we've covered quite most of the questions, Chair, except those 2 points that I think we'll probably more do write-up in detail in that regard. Thank you so much, Chair and members. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Honorable Tobias, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, if I sound controversial, please pardon me, I had to say this. Sometimes the reason where we are in terms of our fiscal policy, it's our lack to utilize the intelligentsia that we have developed in the country to advise us in terms of our macroeconomic policy. Therefore, Dr. Saraj is one of the typical example of what he has been regurgitating over the years in terms of our fiscal stance. The day that we recognize these people properly and allow them to engage us in other platforms is then that we will have a basket of ideas packaged and deposited so that we can look at other options. But the failure of us on a regular basis to do that has led us to where we are. That's the first point. The second point, Dr. Jantjies, you see, we lost the intellectual capability in Denel because people left and came back as consultants. And we have been singing that song for a number of years and nothing has happened. That's why some of us has taken a view of not even regurgitating the same problems over and over again and zooming into those that we can be able to deal with. That's why the question today was specific about these 2 municipalities, because I want to look at why those municipalities did not take that opportunity. Therefore, Comrade Chair, if Parliament does not create a fiscal space or a debate for a fiscal space to deposit either to Cabinet or to the ruling party, while limiting ourselves to imbibe from this knowledge. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable T. Honorable members, and let me again take this opportunity and thank PBO, Dr. Jantjies and your team for the engagement with the committee. Also thank the committee for engaging with the presentation by PBO. Thank you very much. I think it was quite a good engagement. And Dr. Jantjies, with the things that you said you'll come back with, please do so. Okay, thank you. That takes care of this agenda item. Let's go to the next agenda item, and that is looking at, just give me a second. What's the next agenda item? The minutes, Mashile?
Chair, the agenda item, the next one is the consideration of the minutes.
Yeah, yes.
A number
okay.
of minutes, from the 19th of September.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Right. Thank you. Honourable members, the minutes were circulated to us, as Mr. Mashile is indicating.
So I'm in Parliament meeting now.
Oh, well, we better do something about the potholes, eh? Have you seen the one outside?
Memezi, please. Memezi, please mute.
Still there. A truck down.
Where?
Outside.
Honourable Memezi, please.
Okay.
I've got a shop in landscape.
Can you please mute him? Honourable Memezi, please mute. Asifuna ukuzwa indaba zenu zama potholes. Thanks. Okay, we're on the minutes of the 19th of September. Right. Can I have a mover for the adoption?
Chairperson, I move.
Honorable Lenzana moves. Seconder.
Kaiso seconds.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kaiso. Minutes adopted. Minutes of the 2nd of November. Mover.
Matafa moves.
Matafa moves. Seconder.
I so move.
Honorable Tandi Tobias seconds. Thank you. Honorable members on the minutes of the 8th of November. Mover.
I move, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Kaiso moves. Seconder. Of the minutes of the 8th.
Mlenzana.
Honorable Lenzana seconds the adoption of the minutes of the 8th of November. Thank you very much.
Chair, we have got the ones for the 7th.
I'm sure we need the 7th. Are you sure? Okay, the minutes of the 7th.
Mlenzana move.
Mlenzana moves. Thank you. Seconder. I'm listening, other members.
I so move.
Honorable Tobias seconds the minutes of the adoption of the minutes of the 7th of November. Minutes duly adopted. Thank you, honorable members. This takes care of agenda item number 5. Can we go to agenda item number 6? Honorable members, I'll request Mashide to flight the draft 4th term program, which was sent to you. This, honorable members, talks to the issues that have been raised in the MTS, especially around adjustments. Mashile, let's fly to the
Yeah, it's coming now. No?
Yeah, it's a code. It's a shy round the code. Okay, it's coming. Okay. Mr. Mashide?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Let's start from today going forward so that other members can see what is in store for us. It's going to be a very busy time. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So today is the 14th. We have just had PBO on the different bills. Tomorrow we're meeting FFC on the bills, right? And then we're also meeting on Friday again. It's a joint sitting. It's public hearing, am I right?
Yes, Chair. Yes, you are right.
Yeah, public hearings on Friday. And then on Tuesday, we must consider and adopt the the 2023 Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. Okay. And then it looks like on the 22nd, we'll be having a debate on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. And then Friday, briefing by departments. With okay. Mashile.
Yes, Chair.
We have already identified departments. This one is this. Didn't you bring in the old draft?
Yeah, it's the old one. We're meeting with the Department of Human Settlements.
No.
Yes.
Take it down. We'll consider it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Let's properly fill that program. Yeah. So that we give our members the full picture. So let's postpone that to tomorrow. Go and fill in those those gaps. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, our members. We'll deal with that tomorrow. Then after that, Mashile, do you have any announcements?
Yeah, the only announcement that we have is that we are meeting tomorrow. We are meeting with the FFC to receive a briefing on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, 2023 Adjustment Appropriation Bill, as well as the 2023 Eskom Debt Relief Amendment Bill.
Okay.
And then the second thing is that we've had a correspondence, the responses from the minister on the questions that were raised on the meeting that we had on the 7th, as well as the responses of the FFC on the questions that were raised in the meeting we had with them. Thanks, Chair.
Have they been circulated to the oral members, the responses?
Yes. Yeah, they were circulated on this morning. The one for the FFC was circulated this morning during the course of our meeting today. And then the other one for the minister was circulated on the 10th, that is last week, Friday.
Oral members, please go and check those responses because they respond to the questions that you have that you raised to complete the picture. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Am I right? The meeting is adjourned until tomorrow when we meet to consider the presentation by FFC. Thank you very much, everybody on the platform. The meeting is adjourned.
Long live the chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson.
Don't forget your promise you made, Chair.
Eh?
Don't forget your promise you made.
Yeah. Whatever promises I've made. Okay. So thanks, thanks, all members.
A lot of stuff on the order paper today, Chair. It's loaded there, I see.
I know. Thanks, Bye.
Yep. Have a great weekend, Chairperson.
Hi, Musa.
Hi, Jen. Right. Uncle. When the weekend, right?
Where is this Musa? I don't see him even there in the lockout and all. What's going on?
We were excluded on this one, Honorable Sheikh Imam. They said the space is only for members.
Don't die that.
Maybe Chairperson must organize a physical meeting.
Yeah, we must have one. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.